There is only one rule today. Don't ask about the jellyfish. Well, hello there, I'm Détroit. Plants. I haven't drawn some in a while. How do you draw plants again? We'll figure it out. Subscribe for more things to learn with me. I really want to draw plants, and what a better way to do that than draw a botanical garden in a greenhouse? I want a nice, relaxing place, at dawn, and if it takes 5 hours and 21 minutes, then it shall. I mean, it did. It took exactly 5 hours. Sketching was rather simple. I took inspiration on the Grand Palais in Paris for the design of a glass house, or the feel of it at least, because I'm not going to draw something as complicated. What I'm imagining is a greenhouse with big glass panels held by a thin metallic structure. 2 doors, 2 windows, also made of glass. For the greenhouse to stand, it needs to rely on a strong foundation, so there will be small walls, barely bigger than the wooden table. The floor is made of wood as well. Back to the tables. I see dark metallic legs for them. They need to fit with the greenhouse and be strong enough to hold heavy pots filled with soil. Before I even started the line art, I knew it was going to be painful. I shouldn't say painful, sorry. It just took a long time and wasn't that fun, that's all. But there is no escaping it, so here we go. I'll just speed it up a bit more. It's a good thing from the start I used a perspective star. I have a brush that makes such a star and it's really helpful. If you don't have such a brush, I would recommend you to get one, or if you don't want to bother, you can use the polygon tool. Click the gear icon at the top, check the box named star, and add as many sides as you want, up to 100. And there you go, you have a perspective star. Without it, all the table angles would have looked wonky. You can note that I only used 1 point perspective in this drawing. There isn't much effect of perspective in the other 2 directions, and that makes it a lot easier to draw the horizontal and vertical lines. Only the depth dimension is impacted. For the straight lines, at first I wanted to do them all by hand, to give them a more simple feel, less angular, but I gave up pretty soon. Apart from the metallic structure of the greenhouse, I think all the lines that are vertical or horizontal were made by holding shift and tracing. This makes perfectly straight lines. About the workflow of the line art. You can see that I do things in order, one type of object at a time. The greenhouse line art is on one layer, the tables on another, the pots on the third, and so on. Because it will be filled with plants, I'm not sure exactly which lines are going to show and which are going to be erased. Just in case, I keep everything and I use a mask to hide parts of it rather than erasing the lines. I am also constantly adding new layers, inking on them, and only when I am satisfied with them do I merge the layers together. This is all in the perspective of being able to change things if I need to. For this picture, it might seem overkill and unnecessary, but for things like commission artworks, which I do, and you can ask from me on Twitter, it's important to be able to make changes efficiently. Imagine a case where your client wants a picture of a room and you fill it with objects, and then the client asks to remove certain details and, I don't know, move a table over. Would you rather erase half the picture and redraw it differently, or simply bring back the lines you hid behind the badly positioned table? That's what I'm doing here. Even if I only draw this for your and my own enjoyment, I might as well stick to good habits. Now, about the plants. This is the whole purpose of this drawing. I wanted to draw plants, and so I did. I wanted a few varieties of plants and flowers here and there. Some are easier to draw, and some aren't. At first I placed the plants, according to my earlier sketch, and then I drew them properly. I want to bring your attention to 2 plants in particular. First, the big one at the bottom left. This was kinda hard to draw. A plant is 3-dimensional and goes in every direction. To make it simpler, I decided to imagine every blade of this sort of grass as a single ribbon. Drawing a flat band bending is more simple than imagining a whole plant. What a ribbon is 2 parallel curves, so this is what I'm drawing. Now, depending on it, if it's going towards us or away from us, there is only one bit of line to erase where the curves intersect. Do that a few dozen times and you have a full plant. Now onto the second plant I want to talk about, the one in the bottom right corner. It's more common to draw plants like leaves and then add the stem, but it looks better instead to draw the leaves and the stem together in one continuous line. This plant has heart-shaped leaves. This makes harmonious curves. If the leaf is pointing to the side, you can only see one half of the heart. Depending on the angle, a bit of the other half will show up behind it. If, however, the leaf faces us, the start of the stem will be hidden. See, this is why I wanted to draw plants. It forces you to think in 3 dimensions and to simplify the process because it's too hard to draw straight away. It is also very difficult to make construction lines for it, so you just have to work your way around the problem. It's a really good exercise in my opinion, even more for your imagination than your skills. And that will be it for the line art. The next step, of course, is the coloring. Do you remember the brief color map I made right after the sketch? It's time to bring that back. This color map was just a mix of gradients and tones to get the light orientation, the warmth of the scene, and know what will and won't pop out. Because I did it quickly earlier, now I don't have to guess and I can color pick straight from it and add it to my illustration, but in a cleaner way. This is really useful, especially for the source of light. Since the light comes from the top middle right, the walls of the greenhouse will cast shadows on the ground, and the further back you get, the more contrast there will be with the front. What I mean is that with the tree line outside, the back of the greenhouse is in shadows. Besides, an object standing between the light and the observer will appear darker by contrast to said observer. Anyway, that's more about the rendering side. For now, I'm still filling in the flats. I'm not a big fan of the wand tool over every layer option. Soon enough, I will have gradients everywhere, and the selection from the wand tool is not that great about it. Instead, I almost always opt for contiguous pixel selection based on a single layer. Since all my line art is on different layers, I duplicated the group of layers for the inks and flattened it into a single one. I will not use it as my final inks, but I can now select every area between the lines to flat the colors. From that, I get a layer for each group of colors, like the ground, the table wood, the pots, etc. These layers will be the base for my clipping masks during rendering, which is now. I always call it rendering, although it's probably not the right word. What I do in this phase is detail the colors, add shadows and lighting to every part of the drawing. For example, the floor. I will gradient it so that it is darker near the back. I am basically reproducing what I did in the color map at the beginning, only better and more precise. Something I use a lot is layer styles. There are like 20 different layer styles you can pick from in Photoshop, and each of them does something very different. Usually the best way to use them is to try them and see what fits best. To be honest, I've been using Photoshop almost every day for years, but I have no idea what half of the styles do. Either I try them all to see what's best, or I use the ones I know. There are 3 in particular I use all the time. The first is the soft light layer, although I will sometimes use another light layer depending on the result. As the name implies, this blends a lighter layer onto what's underneath. It's good for lighting, especially in mood drawings like this one. I will use this sort of layer when I color the plants. The second layer style I use a lot, the most even I think, is multiply. A multiply layer will take the color of the layer and add it to what's underneath, while also adding the darkness. So it's always going to get darker. The lighter the color of the layer, the less the impact will be. Because I don't really want to darken the drawing a lot, I will lower the opacity. Whatever layer style you use, you should always play with the opacity to see what fits best. Oftentimes, the full effect of the layer style looks very artificial, for lack of a better word, so it's best to soften it with lower opacity. I like the multiply layers to add textures or small details. In this drawing, one example is the wood texture on the tables and the floorboards. I just added a darker pattern with a multiply layer and put the opacity at 20%, really low. Finally, the third layer style I often use is the coloring layer. Now, that's a tricky one. You know, colors are made of 3 things: hue, saturation, and brightness. The coloring layer style doesn't change saturation or brightness, it just shifts the hue. What makes it tricky is that the shading applied to whatever you want to change the color of is to be taken into account as well. Depending on the mood you want and the lighting, you shade with a darker tone, but you also shift the hue towards either colder or warmer tones. However, changing the base color with the coloring layer, you will need to adjust the tone of the shading as well. I use this style of layers to add diversity to the pots that so far have been all the same color. The rendering part of the artwork is also where I will add the reflection on the walls to indicate that they are made of glass, for example. I also tweak the curves of the entire drawing to make sure it's fine in terms of saturation and brightness. For different artworks, I will also add glows or more textures. Basically, at this point in the process, I add all sorts of details and final touches. All except one. There is one thing I have yet to do, simply because at this point of the drawing process, I haven't yet decided if I will do it or not. Turns out, I will. I'm talking about coloring the line art. Remember the part where I insisted on keeping the inks on separate layers? This is where it's useful. After coloring everything but the line art, the fact that all the lines are pure black doesn't feel right. Instead, I want to turn every line to color. Because my inks are on different layers, it's now much easier to do. All I need is a clipping mask for each layer of inks and add the corresponding tone. The only part where I have to be careful is for the line art of the tables. I did the inking of the wood and the metallic feet on the same layer, so I will have to do it by hand instead of using the bucket filling tool. My basic rule here for the color is picking the same tone as the object, for example brown for the wood of the tables, and make it much darker. It still reads as line art, but it's much softer than pure black. Of course, you have to take into account the shading. For example, the pots. For most of them, a darker orange will do, like on the pot of the lower left corner. However, for the pot that's underneath the table, I need a different tone. I don't know if it makes sense, but I'm trying to keep the ratio between base color and ink color the same. So if the pot is colored darker than another pot, the inking also needs to be darker than the other pot. And now we have the final version of the picture. Let's watch the difference between black line art and colored line art. This is a very simple but neat trick to instantly change the mood and making a softer image. I hope you enjoyed this illustration process. Like this video if you did, and tell me in the comments what sort of things you would like to see me draw next. If you have questions on my process or advice to give me, I also take those, so don't hesitate. Subscribe for a lot more art videos and check out my social media in the description. I'm Detroit and I have no idea what you're talking about. A jellyfish in a greenhouse? Are you crazy? Anyway, bye!